Hello, everyone. My guest today is Shishir Mehrotra. He's the CEO and co-founder of a company called Coda. He was formerly an executive at YouTube, where he helped grow the platform to the world's largest video destination, helping lead operations there. He also held leadership roles at Microsoft and served as founding CEO of Centrata, which was acquired by Launcher. He's also an MIT graduate. Shishir, you ready to take us to the top?
Yeah, sounds good.
All right. So you launched this thing, I think, in 2014. You're still pre-revenue today, but you're learning a lot based off kind of your alpha and beta launches. Help us understand what the company does and what you've learned from the alpha launch.
Sure. So we started the company in 2014. The company, we built a new type of document. It's an all-in-one document that blends the best of documents, spreadsheets, presentations, applications, all into one new surface. The thesis is that anybody can build a doc as powerful as an app. We ran the company a little bit non-traditionally and we're in quiet stealth for about 3 years, building up the product with a small number, a few dozen alpha customers. We launched the beta in late 2017. That grew quickly into about 100 companies. And we launched the 1.0 this past February, about 5 months ago. We're now tens of thousands of users, thousands of companies around the world. We'll launch pricing in the next couple months.
Okay. So sorry, how many companies are on you now? About 1,000?
Thousands, mid-thousands.
Okay, so call it maybe 4,000 or 5,000, something like that. And where did you, tactically, how did you sign up these folks? Going all the way back to 2014, what channels did you use?
Yeah, most of it was word of mouth. I mean, there was a handful of things that worked well in terms of communities we dropped into. The product hunt community is probably one of the best for Coda. Tends to draw a lot of people. A lot happened on Reddit and various forums. A lot of the demand for Coda tends to come through sort of two different mechanisms. One is people that I think of as sort of tool seekers that are coming after Coda as a new type of document purely, but the other type generally come after a set of use cases, and so they tend to arrive first in our template gallery. I kind of think of it as front doors and side doors, and in those cases, we tend to be relevant in communities of particular type. So we show up in community forums for people trying to track fitness, or people trying to track project management, or people trying to run better meetings, or so on.
So I want to actually quantify some of this because my team did some research on the distribution channels. So back in October 2017, you launched on Product Hunt, got about 5,000 upvotes. Quantify what that meant for the business. So how many new signups did you see that day?
Let's see. So yeah, 5,000 upvotes is it was pretty good first launch. Tens of thousands of signups that day, or that week, I should say.
Yep. And these were all individual seats, or did you see a lot of kind of at Google and at Uber and at Airbnb signing up?
You mean as opposed to at Gmail?
Yeah, as opposed to individual users using it like personally for fitness.
Let's see, early on and back then, I mean, it's probably about the same percentage. We're about 80% businesses, about 20% individuals and consumers.
Okay. Now, anyone listening to this is going to go, wow, this seems like they've done a great job signing people up. Is he betting on a freemium plan? And also, how the heck has he supported himself for the past 4 or 5 years with no revenue? So you've either raised a ton of money or you've sunk a bunch of your own capital in. Which one is it?
We raised a bunch of money. So we raised about $60 million across a couple rounds of financing.
6 or 6-0?
60.
Okay. So 60 million raised. Most of that capital, where has it been deployed?
Well, most of it's still in the bank, but the capital's mostly been deployed to engineering. I mean, we were probably 70-80% engineers for until probably in the last year.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah. So what's the team size look like today?
We're about 50 people.
All in there in San Mateo?
No, we're Mountain View, San Francisco, and Seattle.
Okay, very cool.
And then we have a few people spread out, Florida, New York, so on.
So, I guess, is it fair to say then you're betting hard on a freemium model? You want to get up to kind of millions of users quickly and then try and go $4, $5, $6 kind of a seat per month, something like that?
Yeah, so it's definitely a freemium model. I mean, I think products like this, new documents, so on, they spread quickly, and so you want as few frictions as possible in that spread process. And as they stick, people tend to find more and more important use cases and then upgrade through it. In terms of the pricing model, we're going through that now with all the different companies that are using us, and we'll roll it out in the next couple months. But the current thinking is that it's a creator-centric model, so that you don't pay for many products in the space pay for all types of users. Our current plan is that we charge for creators and not for editors. That incents a certain type of behavior of allowing people to share more freely. Might mean the per seat price of the creator is a little bit higher, but when blended together with all the editors, it tends to work out to pretty similar.
So a team of 100 might use you, but maybe there's only 3 people creating docs and the rest are actually editing. You'll charge for the 3 that are creating.
Yeah, so the ratio tends to be 8 to 1, 10 to 1 tends to be the general creator to contributor ratio. And that's actually something that was part of the Coda thesis from the start. It was before Coda, I spent a while at Google. Before that, I spent a bunch of time on Microsoft working on Office. That ratio of maker to user is a ratio we've seen across the Office suite as well. The way those products are used to.
And then, so take me back again to kind of some of the earlier days here. So your first round of, you leave the company, you leave YouTube, you jump directly into this. Your first round of capital, how much did you raise? And the follow-up question on that is, was it simply you pointing to your historical resume at YouTube that allowed you to raise at a valuation that you weren't getting? I mean, you have no idea what the valuation is going to be that early. How do you even think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say our fundraising process was pretty different than most. I mean, this is my second company I've started. My first one was 20 years ago, and that one it took us, 6 months to raise $500,000. And this one we managed to raise. The first round was about 25 million, and it was done basically over a weekend. And I think there's probably a couple different things that went into it. Certainly, the quality of the team was high on the list. As myself, my co-founder Alex, and I both have pretty good track records. Both with startups as well as with larger organizations. And then it was the market and the space and our approach to it. I mean, at the time, we hadn't really built anything yet, but we had a pretty good idea of what we wanted to build. The pitch deck was basically 69 slides of product mocks. And it basically had the view of what we were going to end up building back then.
Have you published that anywhere?
I haven't, no.
Come on, you should release that now. That's a really interesting story.
Yeah, at some point I will.
There's nothing sensitive in there, right? It's just it's early UI stuff, right?
Is there anything sensitive? I have to go back and look at it. It's I would say it's a roadmap that we're still following. So I go through it with new employees, and I think there's many companies that start and you end up doing something very different than where you started. This one is pretty true to our original path. We're still basically executing on that plan. So it does include a lot of stuff we haven't shipped yet. But other than that, it's pretty close to what we built.
So 25 million raised kind of on day one. Now, when I look up the actual docs you filed from a government perspective, it all looks like it's in one round. So did you basically set terms and then let it roll, and you slowly added more on the 25 on the same terms, going up to 60 over the past couple of years?
No. We raised a second round about a year later. That was done. So the first round was led by Greylock and General Catalyst. And then we raised another round about a year later, led by Khosla and NEA.
How much on that one?
About 35 million. The rest of it. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, got it.
In both cases, I squeezed in about 15 angels, friends of mine, and so on that were interested in joining the company.
So what do you? I mean, you were at YouTube, so you get this, right? What do you have to scale to? Okay, this is going to sound like a crazy question. It's such a San Francisco question, but I'll ask it because you're the perfect guy to ask.
Okay.
Assume you never have any revenue. Right? Let's assume you're going to go public with no revenue, right? How big do the numbers have to get? How strong does the viral coefficient have to be for our analysts, stupid Wall Street analysts, to actually understand the future potential revenue opportunities?
Well, that's not our plan.
Okay.
we're going to launch pricing. So, I mean, I can answer a theoretical question. And I think SaaS businesses and YouTube are pretty different. I mean, YouTube was bought for $1.6 billion. I showed up, 10 months after the acquisition. We were doing tens of millions in revenue, basically big sponsorship deals. It was basically nothing compared to what the scope of the business was. It took us about 3 years to get to $1 billion revenue run rate. That process, like at the time, was seen as not obvious in the consumer space that you could take a scale of what we were probably tens of millions of daily active users at the time. Turning that into $1 billion in revenue was something that hadn't been done many times before, but had been done at least a couple times. Nowadays, I think in the consumer space, that's seen as somewhat obvious that if you can get yourself to tens of millions of daily active users, then you've got a pretty meaningful. Then you can build a pretty meaningful business out of it. The SaaS space is different though, because in the SaaS space, not having pricing actually stunts growth. I mean, there's definitely. We launched in February, and it's certainly one of our top customer complaints is we want to know what it's going to cost us. And so I don't think it's really that comparable. So I'm not sure I would trust a company that got to great SaaS traction without pricing for very long.
So what are your, do you care more, do you look more on a daily basis or do you look less frequently? Do you measure monthly active users? And if so, what's the activity that says, yes, they're active?
Yeah, I mean, we look daily. I have a whole this is actually similar both consumer world and business world. I think monthly active users are really easy to. They're just a they're easy fluctuate metric where you can take very light-hearted users and end up counting them.
Like they logged on once, but like did nothing.
Yeah. So I mean, our basic view is we think of users as a pretty typical growth funnel, but our activation period, we give people 2 weeks of what we think of as our trial period, where as they're getting started, they tend to either stick or leave within that 2 week period.
What do you have to get them to do though in that first 2 weeks to drastically increase stickiness?
I mean, the best signal of it is sharing a doc. And so the moment they share a doc with someone else, that's generally
which means you have to create it too, right?
Which means they have to do all the steps before that to create it, make it theirs, and so on. But sharing is really that moment. There are people that start with share. It's actually quite interesting that a product like ours, they'll say, "Hey, I'm checking out Coda," and they'll share it with a teammate, and that tends to be just as effective. So whether they've created a lot of it before or not, that share moment seems to be. It's thinking about it in human terms, it's your moment of endorsement. It's your moment of, okay, I think enough of this that I want to try it out with my colleagues. And then after that period, after that 2 week period, we tend to see people either embark or not embark in the product. At that point, our frequency tends to be pretty high. It's about it's 80+% of our users are active 3 or more days a week.
And what does active mean?
They've opened the doc. So I tend to, so actually maybe backing up a moment, I tend to think of metrics, try to define them as simply as possible, because I find that if you put a lot of nuance in it, then you'll spend all your time explaining the nuance. So to be a daily active user on Coda, you just have to open a document on a given day. We then layer on, did they take an edit action? Did they take what we call a maker action, or just viewer actions? Those are the 3 categories of actions we look at. And so on a given day, 80+% of our users are active, meaning they open the doc at least 3 out of 7 days in a week, which for a product that tends to be mostly during the work week, I think basically means we're used through the week. So that sort of tends to be the second phase. And the third phase we look at is how it spreads, and how did those set of makers turn into bring on their teammates and contributors, and at what rate did they then become makers themselves and create their own docs. And so those are sort of 3 phases of how we think about the team spread journey.
And so what is today daily active users?
It's tens of thousands of users.
Okay, 10. When do you think you break 100,000?
100,000 maybe next year.
Okay, you think maybe early next year. And what is that, I guess, transition that to number of docs created over the past, call it 30 days on the platform?
Docs created is thousands as well.
Okay.
So it tends to be, and actually maybe to back into that a little bit so you can understand the dynamics. And I think for your listeners, it's interesting because Coda is sort of 2 different things. One is it's a product that competes as a document, and people tend to use it a lot, like you might use Google Docs or Office or so on. But the things people build in Coda tend to feel like applications. Many of
I was going to say, by the way, you feel way more to me like I move from Google Docs for processes. Actually, now I use Airtable plus Zapier, and I can get a lot done. And it makes it feel like English that I'm typing in Airtable is actually codified, and it actually feels like an app when it all works together. I feel like what you've built is you've essentially you've taken it out of Airtable, and it's more like a Word doc, but it works with all the back end kind of coding parameters.
Yeah, that's right. So I mean, I think, and to use that analogy and go a step further, many of the use cases people describe their Coda docs to us, they tend to think of them like applications. So people will use Coda and say, okay, I've rebuilt my CRM system, or I've rebuilt my feedback tracker, or our task tracking system, or so on. And so the way the product spreads tends to mimic these 2 different behaviors: how docs spread and how apps spread. And so you depending on the use case, you will end up basically seeing a similar spread. Like depending on the app use case, we'll see a spread pattern that's very similar to whatever that category of apps is like. So if you end up picking up Coda as a CRM tool, we'll spread like a CRM tool does. If you end up picking up Coda as your way to track meeting notes, we'll end up scaling and spreading a lot like how you
Evernote,
like Evernote, right? Or actually, probably meeting notes probably closer to like Google Docs is probably closer.
Yeah. So over the past 30 days, how many kind of apps or docs have been created? Would you say thousands?
Oh, thousands. Yeah.
Yeah, but less than 10,000.
Yeah, less than 10.
Yeah. Okay, so it's a little less than a 1-to-1 ratio between kind of active users and apps created over the past 30 days.
Yeah, it tends to be pretty close.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Very good stuff. What about churn? So like, how do you measure if people are getting more or less active? And kind of the equivalent, if you had revenue, would be expansion revenue, right? Or contraction revenue. But for you, it's kind of expansion usage or contraction usage.
Yeah, that's right. Right. Yeah. I mean, I think all those same metrics sort of apply. The way we tend to spread, so there's sort of two different parts there. One, how we spread inside a company tends to have a very high viral spread rate. So basically, a group of, just to think of it somewhat specifically, one maker picks it up. They on average end up sharing with 10 people. Of those 10 people, something like 3 of them end up being makers themselves. They share with another 10 people, basically until you run out of people in the company.
Those are your actual metrics about?
Approximately,
okay.
Yeah. And in the good cases, so as long as that first person is successful, and so if the first person is not successful, then that tends to that doesn't happen at all. But when we're successful, we spread very quickly, and so inside of small companies, we have a long list of companies that run sort of everything runs on Coda. In larger companies, we'll end up growing to hundreds of thousands of users as they start to see that spread process. And then the flip side of that is the churn rate. And as people churn out of it, we tend to find that churn is very low after those first 2 weeks. So in the first 2 weeks, it can be 80% of people. But after that, it tends to be very small on a weekly basis, less than 1%. But and over the course of a year, most of the users tend to stay.
Less than ignoring those first 2 weeks over the first year, you'd say churn is what, like 20-30%, something like that?
Yeah, in that ballpark.
Okay, that'd be like 1 or 2% a month after the activation period is kind of over. Yeah. So I mean, look, these activation metrics basically mimic SaaS revenue retention and expansion cohorts as well, right? Basically the same. So what's the biggest risk for you? Like, why haven't you pulled the pricing wall trigger yet? There must be, you're doing some extra planning, you're doing some extra research. I mean, why not just stick it up, see what happens, and then edit quick?
Oh no, I think for getting pricing out, the big thing for us is we're going to introduce a new concept. We have to introduce a pricing model, and it's going to be priced around workspaces, which is pretty typical for products in this space. Mm-hmm. The product doesn't have that yet, and so we're going to introduce workspaces, which is actually a pretty heavily requested feature anyway. And then you'll price on the workspace itself will be a paid workspace or a free workspace. So no philosophy behind it, just time.
When you be going out with Coda Mobile, Coda Automation, and Coda Packs, all things important to you because you did separate product launches for all of them.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I think each of those, basically, the way to think about our process up till now is we have this thesis that you can build a doc as powerful as an app. And we wanted to launch all the main building blocks of what it takes to be able to build up these apps. I mean, it's sort of surprising to people to take a thing that, like you described, starts with a blinking cursor, looks like you can just write words, and then you gradually can add all these different things. You can add an automation layer that allows you to automate all your common activities. What we call Coda Packs is our integration layer. So you can, from Coda, you can integrate with everything from Slack to Gmail to Twilio, and you can go, pull in things, pull in your intercom data, your Salesforce data, and then do things like automate how you send messages out to people, notifying your team when things change, and so on. And so in that process, people end up building these docs that start really small and then grow from there. A lot of people like to describe it as built-in scope creep.
Yeah. We're running here, Shishir, out of time, but last 2 questions here. How aggressive are you being to get that one new user? Will you spend $1, $2, $3? What's that look like?
We haven't done any paid marketing yet, so we're just starting to test where that stands. My goal was we're running a few tests in the next few weeks just to get the mechanics up and running, but I want to launch pricing before we get too aggressive on that.
Yeah, that makes good sense. And then talk to me about burn. I mean, obviously you're burning your pre-revenue. How aggressive are you being though on that? Are we talking $500,000 a month, $1 million a month, something less?
It's 50 so employees, so you can do the math is about $1 million a month.
Okay,
what it ends up being. Yeah.
That's fine. I guess the reason I'm asking you is, do you have another raise in your future, or are you comfortable with the amount of runway you have in your bank right now?
Oh, we'll probably end up raising again. I mean, I think this is a space where, as I've been listening to a bunch of your podcasts, it's a space where you not only have to raise to cover burn, but your acquisition cost for customers also goes up as you get started.
Are you enjoying the show?
Oh yeah, it's great.
Anything you wish I asked that I always don't?
Oh, that's a good question.
Well, email me if you think about it, because I'm always looking.
I'll think about it. I have
a pattern, and sometimes I deviate if something interests me. But generally speaking, you know what I'm after.
I think it's a super valuable show. It's been interesting listening to people open up about how they're thinking about their business.
Well, and thank you for being transparent. On that note, let's wrap up here with the famous 5. Number 1, what's your favorite business book?
Switch by the Heath brothers.
And number 2, is there a CEO you're following or studying?
Daniel Ek from Spotify.
Number 3, what's your favorite online tool for building your company?
Well, we run most of Coda on Coda. So, but other than that, I'd say Figma probably. It's like Google Docs for design. Turns out we were their first customer as well.
Oh, wow.
We have a pretty good Coda pack for Figma, so it integrates well as well.
Number 4, how many hours of sleep you get every night?
5 to 6.
And situation, married, single, kids?
Married, 2 daughters, 10 and 13.
That's great. And how old are you?
I'm 40.
Last question. What do you wish your 20-year-old self knew?
How important those early, deep relationships can be. If I went back to my 20-year-old self, I was dating the woman who I ended up marrying, and I just become friends with the person I ended up starting Coda with. So,
Guys, those of you in San Francisco will look at $60 million raised pre-revenue and go, what the heck is going on? But Shishir is building an idea in a big space, which is essentially, instead of, Airtable makes marketers powerful because they don't need developers to build systems. Now he's basically saying you can do all this in a document, build applications right inside a doc. They've had successful product hunt launches, tens of thousands of active users, now about to turn on pricing. We'll see what happens. They're currently burning, call it $1 million a month with a team of 50 as they look to scale and again, launch that first paywall. Shishir, thank you for taking us to the top.
Thanks, Nathan.